Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to UX Insiders. Many of you will know this is a series of live webinars run by us at the UX Design Institute, and we run these to help give you some insight into what it's like to work in the UX industry. This evening, we're really lucky to be joined by career expert Sarah Doody. Sarah is the founder of Career Strategy Lab, a program that helps UX and product professionals at all stages of their career. This is a Q&A style webinar, so this is your chance to ask all of your burning questions about getting a job in UX. But before we officially kick off, I'm going to explain a little bit about how you can interact with us this evening, and then we'll jump into the Q&A from there. Okay, so if you'd like to just introduce yourself, say where you're tuning in from, tell us a bit about yourself, you can use the chat box for that. But if you have specific questions for Sarah, if you could please use the questions box. That's where we'll look for all the questions during the webinar. And it also means that you can upvote any questions that you're particularly interested in. So please do that if there's a question you're really dying to hear the answer to. It just lets us know that it's an important one, and we'll make sure to get that one covered. So that's how you can chat with us and ask questions. Just before we kick off, I also just want to mention our professional diploma in UX design, which is our career switching course that we offer, because the next course is commencing in a couple of weeks. We have extended our early bird price until the 26th of September, and we have introduced more flexible payment options. So you can now pay over 9 months with 0% interest. This is our career switching program, as I mentioned, because we include career coaching, interview prep, portfolio projects with expert feedback from mentors. So we'll share a couple of links in the chat for anybody who is interested in that. Okay, so that's everything before we start. I'm going to stop sharing now. And Sarah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be with you and so many people.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Sarah, do you want to briefly introduce yourself? I know I gave a small intro, but maybe you can briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll jump in with some questions. I'm sure the audience have lots of questions they want to jump right into.
Yeah, so I am a user researcher and experience designer. I've been working in this field since the early/mid 2000s. So back in the day when there were not education programs and it was a much smaller unknown industry, let's say. And throughout my career, I have worked in large companies, startups, had my own UX consultancy for a while in New York City. And then more recently, I guess you could say became a designer turned founder. And today I am the founder and CEO of Career Strategy Lab, which is an education company that helps UX, product, and tech people learn how to apply product and design principles and strategies to advance their career, whether you've been working in this industry for 20 years or you are just starting out. So I still do a lot of UX, except now it's for my own business, which is very exciting.
Yeah, nice. That sounds really great. And yeah, we're really lucky to be able to speak with you this evening. I'm sure you're exactly who everybody would love to ask questions to. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
I guess I'll kick off with a question to get us started and give everybody a chance to start sending their questions through the questions panel. But I'd love to know, UX obviously is associated with the tech industry. I guess that's where it kind of started out in some ways. But we know obviously it's become much broader than that. And there's pretty much every industry needs UX designers. But I'd love to know from your experience, what are the top industries that are hiring for UX roles right now?
Yeah, so I love this question because recently I did a podcast episode and wrote a few articles around like where to look for UX jobs outside the tech industry, because earlier in this year, and we continue to see large companies, large tech companies, FANG, MANG, whatever they're called these days, laying off people. And, you probably experienced this as well, where there was a lot of fear and concern and panic around, oh my gosh, do people still need UX people, right? And my perspective is that those companies that did layoffs, though it might seem like shocking numbers, when you zoom out and look at who needs UX people outside of Amazon, Meta, Twitter, X, all the companies, there are a lot of companies in other industries that still need UX people. So if I were searching for a job right now, I don't think there's a specific industry that I would say you should focus on. I think the takeaway is look at companies outside of, quote, the tech industry. That could be travel, because now that we're out of the pandemic, we're seeing an uptick in travel, right? Whether that's airlines, hotels, cruises, specific travel companies that do adventures. So that might be one idea. Healthcare is another one, right? Healthcare software, health insurance. And even I would recommend, think maybe a little more local than what you may have been previously looking for in your job search. And by that, I mean, even things like your local government or local municipality or the energy company in your country or town or something like that. Like, I've had so many people work with me who ended up getting hired at a smaller, more local or regional company, and then find out like they received a higher job offer with better benefits and more flexibility than, say, a Meta or an Amazon may have offered them. So the takeaway is get out of your head about focusing on FANG companies, et cetera, and kind of look in your own backyard and look at industries that, are not just, quote, tech industries.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's great advice, and great to acknowledge as well the layoffs, because I guess that's not something that we can ignore. But I think you're totally right that there is so much opportunity for UX outside of those kind of big tech companies.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I can see questions are flying in, so I'm gonna jump in with a few that have gotten some upvotes here. So one is, what is the best way for a junior to market themselves in this current market? Someone with graphic design experience and about a year of professional experience.
Yeah, so hopefully these tips really apply to everyone, regardless of what career stage you are at. But, for someone entering the field right now, let's just address the elephant in the room. Like, you're facing the chicken and the egg of, how do I get hired and get experience if no one will hire me because I don't have experience, right? And so some of the challenges that I see and that I know, many of the people on the call today see posted on social media, et cetera, are really around like, how do I showcase my skills and experience if I don't have real world experience beyond my education program, my degree, my certificate, et cetera? And the main takeaway that I want everyone to recognize is it's not necessarily the quality of the projects you worked on or the fact that it was for a household name type company or something like that. What really matters is your ability to communicate the details of what you did. And that could come through in your portfolio, in your resume, how you describe your skills and experience in interviews. And so specific to junior people, and maybe I'll take that back, specific to everyone, honestly, when I think about the thousands of people that I've worked with, but most people only focus on saying what they did. So showing the final deliverable and not explaining, why did you do that? How did you do that? What happened next? What struggles did you run into, etc. So whether it's in your portfolio or your resume or an interview, you want to be like pulling back the curtain and not just showing some sexy screen in Figma you designed, but walking us through how you got to that end result. I'll pause there because I don't know if you have a follow-up question to that, but I have one other tip for people also.
Yeah, I do have a quick follow-up because somebody's posted a question that's quite related, and I know you mentioned that chicken and egg, and someone here is saying a similar thing of, finding that roles require a couple of years experience and they don't have that experience yet. And I think what they're wondering is, is experience from other roles relevant, and is it still applicable, and can you spin that experience to be relevant?
Yes. So a couple of points to this answer. So the person who asked the previous question, I believe you said they were a graphic designer. So for people switching careers to user experience, whether you were a graphic designer, a teacher, a journalist, a occupational therapist, a nurse, like you need to think about what are the transferable skills and experience that you do have, even though you maybe didn't have the literal word UX in your job title, and come up with a plan of how you're going to show examples of those soft skills in your resume, in your portfolio, in interviews. Because when it comes to showcasing your transferable skills, or frankly, any skills, it's one thing to just have a skills section on your resume, for example. It's another thing to make sure that you represent each one of those skills, for example, in a bullet point in your work history. So the takeaway really is, don't just tell me you have these skills in a bullet list of skills. Show me those skills in action through examples. And I'll give you an example. So a while ago, I had this teacher that was in my career coaching program, and they were switching into UX. They wanted to focus on research, and they previously in their teaching career had been responsible for redesigning some curriculum, and part of that involved research. So I said, well, why can't that research for the curriculum be a project in your portfolio? And they'd never thought of it that way before. And so hopefully that example sparks some ideas for anyone on this call who might be switching to user experience. So even though you don't have UX in your previous job titles, you probably did some things that you might be able to leverage for showcasing the skills that you do have.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Yeah, great advice. And I think that's so important to highlight because, we run a lot of webinars like this, and it always stands out to me when people think that kind of experience isn't relevant just because it doesn't have UX in the title, like you said, or, but I think that's great to focus in on the skills and to show how you have examples of those skills.
And can I add one more thing there for people?
Yeah, of course.
So one of the questions I thought might come up, so maybe we'll just answer it now, is how do you find projects to work on if you don't have experience? And maybe after this, I can send you some links to articles that we could email everyone. But one of the things that I see a lot of people doing is these kind of like unsolicited redesigns. So you see this advice on social media, right? People say, oh, just go to the homepage of Spotify or Amazon or whatever and screenshot it and redesign it. That can be a good form of practice, but what those projects often lack is the real world constraints and the behind the scenes information that you would, if it was a real project, that you would need to take into account. So one example, just Tuesday in my career coaching program, someone presented this project in their portfolio. We do these things called portfolio demo day. And at demo day, someone presented a project they worked on that they have a dog. This is a true story. They have a dog. They take the dog to this dog bath place. Like, it's like a car wash for dogs. It's a place with big sinks, or like a laundromat, and you can wash your dog. And I didn't know this existed, but so they noticed this company had a really out of date and confusing website. So instead of just redesigning the website with no input from anyone else, they took it upon themselves to contact the business owner, have a meeting, understand some of the problems, identify constraints, like the website was built on Wix and the company couldn't just switch off it. And then they did this redesign, including a bunch of usability testing. So I use that example because there's a big difference between someone that would just screenshot the homepage and make a perfect, pixel perfect, cool, modern homepage, versus the person that tells the story of involving the stakeholder, these constraints, etc. Because the latter, the one where they involve the stakeholder, is more representative of what you would do in the real world. So if you're thinking about doing these, passion projects, unsolicited redesigns, etc., maybe see if you can make contact with the people who, the stakeholders, and involve them. Because if I had two people apply to the same job and one just did a redesign and the other one did what I just described, guess who I'm going to probably interview?
Mm-hmm. And like you say, it gives you more to talk about when you talk about your process and, the challenges you run into and the hurdles you come across, because it's more realistic and because that's what happens in the real world. There are those challenges. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Great. Thank you for that. So we have another question here that's gotten a couple of upvotes, which is, what are recruiters looking at? Is it CV, resume, cover letter, LinkedIn? Which matters most?
Yeah, so I wish I had a magic ball and I could tell you the exact answer. And as with many things in life and user experience, I have to say it depends. There is no exact order that people look at things at. And I interviewed some recruiters and hiring managers from companies like IBM and Facebook a couple of years ago. And maybe we can include this in the links that hopefully you can send out. But they each described their process of vetting candidates. And one of them said they look at resume first. One said they look at portfolio. I think another said LinkedIn. So, the takeaway for everyone is that you don't know what I call career marketing material someone will look at first. That's why it's so important to give them all the equal amount of attention, because one thing I notice is a lot of people spend so much time on their portfolio and then they neglect or rush their resume or their LinkedIn, and it doesn't match up, or it's incomplete, or reflect, like their LinkedIn still reflects their teaching career, for example. So you really have to be mindful of how all of those things work together and the first impression that someone has. The one thing I would say though is, I think that knowing that recruiters and hiring managers, like, where do they hang out to find candidates? A lot of times on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn has a product called LinkedIn Recruiting, where they are easily able to search candidates with a really granular set of criteria. Mm-hmm. And so I think your LinkedIn is really, really important, like as a first line of defense. But still, you can't just say one of them is kind of the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So to keep an eye across all of them and make sure they're all telling the same story, I guess, as well.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So we have a question here that's asking, do you need to include metrics proving the success of projects showcased in your portfolio and resume?
So metrics and quantifying what you've done is really important. And one of the challenges that people ask me about all the time is, what if the project didn't launch? What if it launched and it didn't do well? And basically they're saying, what if I can't include numbers like, I did this thing and it made the company $1 million? That's what most people think including numbers and metrics means. And quantifying your experience can mean the impact of the project. It could also mean quantifying the scope of what you did. So let's use research as an example. It's one thing to say, I was responsible for usability testing for this project. That's great. It's more powerful to say you did usability testing with this many participants. The sessions were 1 hour each. They went through 20 tasks. Like, that is an example of how you can quantify the scope of what you've done, because it's much different to say you were responsible for conducting, or creating and analyzing results of a survey to 5,000 people versus a survey that 5 people filled out. So when it comes to quantifying, don't just think it has to be some incredible metric about making $1 million, because that's just one element of quantifying and including metrics. And the other thing I would say is, let's get off the research example. If you're talking about a design system you built, great. One thing to say you made a design system, another thing to say you made a design system with this many components, it took this long, you worked with this many stakeholders, it was applied to these many screens or products or something. So hopefully that gives people some ideas about how to quantify beyond just, celebratory things about the product launch.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm sure, people listening are relieved to hear that it doesn't have to be the $1 million metric, and that's not necessarily what they need to have.
And the other thing I would add to that, because it very much relates to this, is, a lot of people ask me, can I include projects and talk about projects in interviews, on my resume, etc., that did not launch? And at least once a week, I'm asked this. And my stance is, just because a project did not launch, it is not a reflection of your skills as a fill in your job title, right? You have no control most of the time over whether something launches or not. So just because something didn't launch, you can still include it. If it was delayed, it's not your fault, more than likely. So just make sure that you're not excluding work you did just because you're worried that because it didn't launch, someone's going to think that you're, unqualified and incompetent, because that is not true at all. If I have so many projects, hundreds of wireframes that never saw the light of day, but I still talk about those projects, or I would if I was applying to jobs.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, great. So I've noticed a question here, kind of moving up the ranks and upvotes. So I'm going to go to that one next,
Okay.
which is, do you know of any organizations that offer voluntary UX jobs to get some real world experience?
Off the top of my head, short answer is no. This is one of those Google it questions. So yeah, probably people in the chat will have recommendations. One of the articles we can link to gives people ideas for how to find projects that they could work on. So let's move that question to the follow-up email.
Yeah, perfect. That sounds good. And there's another one that I imagine might also be in the follow-up email, which is any good examples of UX research portfolios. I know there are many articles available online with good examples of portfolios. Maybe that's one we can do a follow-up on as well.
Yeah, I can't point you to a specific user research portfolio that I think is amazing. The portfolios of everyone that I work with, like they're contained inside Career Strategy Lab, and we don't just publish those on the internet because people would have to choose to voluntarily do that. But the question of, because I get this a lot, how do I make a research portfolio? Like, I watched your video, I read your article about how to make portfolios, but how do I make my research portfolio? How do I make my portfolio if I'm a UX strategist, UX writer, like fill in the blank? And the takeaway I want everyone to realize is that the steps to create a portfolio are the same, regardless of what you specifically do and what stage you're at. And I can confidently say this because I've been doing this since 2017, helping people with their portfolios and such. And I've seen like every type of role get hired by following the structure that I teach, which we don't have the time to go into it today. But the short of it is, think about telling me what you did, why you did it, how you did it, what happened, quantify where possible. Let me see behind the scenes, and don't just limit it to slides that have a deliverable or a final screen or a sitemap. And at the top, it just says the word sitemap, or like, next I made a survey, because that doesn't tell me anything about what you actually did. So I know that's very, very preliminary steps of how to make a portfolio, but regardless of what you do, the steps are the same.
Okay, great. Okay, so following on from that then, one question we have here is, do you have insight into how maybe the European market differs from the American market? You know, do you need to tailor applications to each? Or what do you think about that?
So I will say this because I've had people join my career coaching program from all over the world. Like, we've had people get hired from Spain and Sweden and the UK and Australia and Canada and all these places. And so because of that, I have a lot of confidence in saying that my approach seems to be working around the world. Now, I think like there might be nuances around, and some of it I think is a little bit like social or cultural, around perhaps people in, say, the USA and Canada being more likely and confident and less hesitant to like brag about their skills and experience and like really be loud about it. You know, whether loud means posting on LinkedIn or highlighting things in a cover letter. I guess maybe what I'm saying is some people and cultures are more prone to being a little bit more bold in presenting themselves. And I would say that it seems to be working with everyone that I've worked with from various countries. But I can't specifically, like, it's a little bit of a vague question. I don't know if that's helpful, but I think like if you pay attention to making sure your materials are all consistent, they go below the surface, and you're very clear on what you're looking for, you're going to stand out, because the bar, at least in my experience, the bar to stand out is very low. And I say that because last year and the year before, I experimented with hiring for other companies. So companies paid me to be responsible for their hiring. Okay. And it was shocking to see the quality of the resumes, the portfolios, etc., because a lot of them were just nice screen and the word at the top like homepage or something with no explanation. So I would say if you stick to the basics, you're going to stand out regardless of where you are in the world.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great advice. And like you say, maybe for those people who are a bit more hesitant to showcase themselves and their skills, not to be afraid to do that. But
Mhm.
I guess good UX is good whether it's in Europe or the US.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because it is so ironic to have to say this, but like don't neglect the user experience of your portfolio, of your resume, of your LinkedIn profile. Like every inch pixel of each of those assets is really, really valuable. And for example, like if your resume is hard to read because you used a 7-point font to make it fit all on one page, that's not a good experience, right? So you have to think about the user experience of everything.
100%, 100%. And I guess, just as an anecdote from my own experience as well, like you said about listing skills, sometimes you see people who list something like attention to detail, and then the company name is not the company that they're applying to, or
Yes.
things like this, because maybe they neglected their cover letter over their portfolio or whichever way it was. So I think that's really great advice. So someone here is just mentioning that they are totally new to LinkedIn. And do you have any tips to make your profile stand out, or how do you make your profile as good as it can be?
So LinkedIn, I'm getting ready to hopefully teach a course about LinkedIn in January, maybe. But the short version of how you optimize and be strategic on LinkedIn, you really have to think about the strategy and goal behind being on LinkedIn. And if you're in the situation where you're trying to get hired, you really want to be tailoring your profile and your activity on LinkedIn to recruiters and hiring managers. So, a few really quick things to pay attention to: the headline, which is the text below your name. That is, that impacts where you show up in search results when a recruiter or hiring manager searches for someone like you. Like that is factored into the algorithm inside LinkedIn Recruiter and on LinkedIn itself. Not only that, though, that little headline below your name, go on LinkedIn right now. You'll see that shows up in a lot of places, shows up in the right sidebar of recommendations, shows up below every comment you post, shows up a lot of places. And that is contributing to the first impression that people have about you and could influence if they click on you or not. So your
Mhm.
headline is super, super important. Um, the banner at the top of your profile, it's a great opportunity to use that real estate to put in maybe another version of your headline, your URL if you have a website, other things. And then the other two areas of your profile that are super important, that about section, um, that is your opportunity to almost treat it like a cover letter. And then the work experience section, if you have a really effective resume, it's virtually a cut and paste job to go update the work experience section of your LinkedIn profile. So those are like the top 4 areas that I would really focus on if I was optimizing my LinkedIn profile today. But the other thing to remember is it's not just about your profile. It's about what you do and how you engage on LinkedIn. And engagement really means 2 things. It means what you post and how you comment and or like or react to other people's posts. And there is data. If you search LinkedIn's help articles, you'll find articles that explain this feature on LinkedIn called LinkedIn Spotlight. And that is part of LinkedIn Recruiter. And if you want to be, quote, spotlighted to recruiters who are searching for people like you in Recruiter, um, the algorithm takes into account if you are commenting and liking the posts of companies that you've applied to and people who work at those companies. So that's really, really important. I'll leave it at that for now, though, because I know we have so many other questions you probably want to get to.
Okay. No, that's great. That's great. And it's an amazing starting point for sure.
And I'm writing down to send you probably a podcast episode and a video where we go through writing an effective LinkedIn profile and some other LinkedIn stuff. So I'll make sure we send that over to your team after this.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody will be really happy to get that. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Okay, great. There's so many questions here. I'm just trying to choose one next. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So we have someone here who's wondering, are things like ageism and neurodiversity a problem when you're looking to switch into UX from another field?
So we wish they weren't. I'm sure it does impact some people's candidacy, unfortunately. Now, I would say, I just did a podcast episode about this, so we'll send you that link. But concerning ageism, I think there's a lot of, it happens on both ends, right? People are worried who are later in their careers that they're going to be perceived as too old, outdated, not specialized enough, too specialized, don't have enough energy, whatever. And there's ageism at the other end of it. And I think in the podcast episode, I really focused on the older end of the spectrum. And I think ageism exists, but we might be making it a bigger deal than it is because it's almost like a clickbaity topic that we know is going to get a lot of engagement, at least on LinkedIn from what I see. So I would say to people who are later in their career, I think you don't need to downplay your experience and try and hide the fact that you have all that experience, because we know companies really value people who have a lot of experience, who can't just like crank out wireframes and do research, but have experience looking at a business as a whole, dealing with difficult stakeholders, connecting the dots really quickly in a variety of different company sizes, industries, etc. So the takeaway really is like, I want people to not fear ageism and instead just own wherever you are at. And I think it could honestly be a blessing if you are in an interview and someone says, probably not literally like, I think you're too old, but if you get that vibe, that may not be the type of company you are going to want to work at and be happy at anyway. And as frustrating as it may be, I think you just have to remember that every post you see on social media where someone is making a big, bold claim about whatever, like that's one person's opinion. And are they doing it to get likes so they can get more followers and sell more stuff or something? And I would really question people's intentions, because I think unfortunately, I think a lot of the advice out there is kind of like clickbaity. So it was a little bit of a roundabout answer, but I hope that kind of gives people some context as to ageism, and then, how to filter out the noise on social media, basically in general regarding career advice.
100%. And I think everybody will appreciate the honesty of the answer as well, because we can't pretend this doesn't exist, like you said. And I liked what you said as well about, maybe that's not the type of company you want to work for anyway. And I think maybe that's something we'll cover later, just talking about, aligning your goals with the companies and that kind of thing. But sorry, were you going to say something?
Well, it kind of goes back to the first question we talked about around what types of companies and industries need UX people. And I don't have data on this, so this is just my like, musings. But if you think of companies, your local car wash, the energy company, the school board, the local hospital, whatever it is, an airline, like companies that are not tech companies who may be more new to user experience, there is a possibility that they don't have the budget to have a user experience team of 20 or something, or 200.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they might be looking for less people who have more experience, such as, people who've been working in UX for 15 years or 20 or 25 years or something like that. So if you're on that like later in your career side of things, that's another reason why maybe you should look to these companies that might be newer to user experience. Like, you could be seen as an awesome asset to those companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Okay, we have a question here that is, I'm going to be honest, it's going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Oh gosh.
Why not go for it?
Okay.
Could you give an example of a LinkedIn headline for someone transitioning into UX?
Yeah. So what you want to think about on your LinkedIn headline is, what are the specific qualities about you that are like a preview to someone wanting to learn more about you? So I use this analogy often where you kind of have to treat your LinkedIn profile or a cover letter, but let's stay with LinkedIn profile and the headline. You have to treat that like a teaser, maybe an appetizer, a movie trailer, or if you like or have ever been to New York City, like a store window on Fifth Avenue. Because a movie trailer, a store window on Fifth Avenue, those are designed to get your attention and suck you in so you watch the whole movie or you go into the store and spend $300, right? Capturing your attention. And so that's what we need the LinkedIn headline to do. Now, a lot of people's LinkedIn headlines say, I'm a UX designer. I want to make products people love. There is nothing special about that. And it's stating the obvious. Like, no one is searching, no one wants to make products people hate, but also thinking about the user. Recruiters aren't sitting there. If I want to hire a UX designer or a UX researcher, I'm typing in UX designer, I'm typing in UX research. I'm not typing in products that people love. And this is going to get to be a little bit of a long answer, but I do have an example of what not to do. I can't remember the exact thing, but I know there was this guy on LinkedIn. I found his profile and his headline said something like, design god, lover of milkshakes, football, and Jesus. And I was like, no recruiter is searching for a designer that loves milkshakes and Jesus and football. Like, what a waste of space in your LinkedIn headline. No offense to people who love football, milkshakes, and Jesus, but like, total waste of space. So let's imagine you are a teacher switching into user experience. And you worked in teaching for 15 years. And you have a master's degree. Well, maybe you didn't have time to get a master's degree. You have like a certificate from UX Design Institute or something in UX, right? So your headline should definitely use the phrase UX designer, UX researcher, previously teacher with 15 years experience. That tells me a lot of information about you. So think about these unique nuggets. It could be your previous work experience. It could be a degree you hold. It could be that you have, let's say you want to work in the healthcare industry, do UX in healthcare, and you previously were a nurse for 5 years. Amazing. Tell us that you want to be a UX designer. UX designer, previously ICU nurse for 5 years looking for a UX job in healthcare. Great. So that hopefully gives some people ideas, but you want to go look at your headline And if it mentions vague things, get that stuff out of there. And you have to really search engine optimize SEO that headline for the literal words that people would be using to search for someone like you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think sometimes I've noticed people are almost afraid to give a sense of themselves and like you say, become quite generic and say something like make products people love or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
it is those things about themselves that make them stand out.
Yeah. And just think to yourself, or if you have friends that are managers or recruiters or something, like think, if I was searching for someone, what would I type into a search bar on LinkedIn Recruiter? And you're not typing in milkshakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to remember it. Okay, great. So we have somebody asking, just kind of going back to what we spoke about, reaching out to maybe a business to ask them, can you redesign their website and work with them? Let's say you did get a job like that and worked with them. They're asking, how would you market that on their, whatever it is, their LinkedIn, their CV? Do you call yourself a freelance UX designer? Can you say it was volunteer or unpaid? How do you talk about that experience?
Yeah. So I think depending on the nature of it, I think a lot of those projects could probably fall under the category of freelance. I think it's also like you have to be confident in how you label projects. So if you're feeling like unethical about something, like that's up to you. But I think a lot of them could fall under freelance. I think the really frustrating thing is from the perspective of people hiring, especially if, like, let's say you're a recruiter in Dublin and all of a sudden you get 50 applications for a job and you start to go through the portfolios and you start to see the same project in a bunch of those portfolios. That's like suspicious and a yellow flag. And that makes you realize, oh, all these people went to XYZ program or boot camp and all these projects look the same and I don't know who did what. So I think there can be benefit to just being transparent about projects that you did as a part of your education program, etc., versus trying to like cross your fingers and hope people think it's a real company, because that level of like spinning can backfire, because for the recruiter, it can feel dishonest. Hopefully that's clear. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions about that. But this is why you often see, or at least I've seen, and I've seen other people post about this, phrases and kind of opinions that are essentially saying, I can spot a insert boot camp name, project, or candidate from a mile away. And it's partially because the same project for like Acme company or whatever is floating around out there. And then when you Google that company, it doesn't exist. So that's kind of the spirit behind it. I just rather people be transparent about it and supplement what they have done in a boot camp or other program. When you have time, go out and do some other projects, such as the pet wash company, to have more real world situations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think it goes back to kind of the theme of what you've been saying this evening around, just being able to be authentic and to talk about it honestly, and, whatever way means that you can talk about it in the best way possible and talk about the full process. And I think maybe you can do that if you're not trying to say cover up something. Yeah.
And the other thing I would remind people, because I know a lot of our attendees probably are or recently graduated from some education, boot camp, university, college, whatever. Now the thought has just left my head. Hold on. Give me like 5 seconds. Shoot, this is embarrassing.
That's okay. Don't worry.
Maybe it will come back to me.
It will
Let's
pop
move
back
on.
into your head for sure
Oh,
in a minute.
darn it. Okay.
You know what? It's probably a result of the many, many different questions I've been shooting at you
I
for the
know
last
it's
50
all
minutes.
over.
So yeah. But no, thank you. We actually have about 10 minutes left. So
Okay.
first, let me thank you for answering all of these questions so well so far. And I guess we'll keep going and see how many we can get through. But thank
Okay,
you.
let's play along.
Um, Okay, so we have somebody here just asking what your opinion is on internships, and they've given a little bit of context that they are, they have experience and maybe are a little bit older, and it feels strange to become an intern. I think they've said here they're 37, feels strange to be an intern at their age, but at the same time they feel like it's the perfect way they could learn UX. So I guess they're just wondering what you think on that.
Yeah, I think internships are a great opportunity to, like this person said, get experience. And I think that part of maybe what they have to consider is are are they worried that applying to an internship that they may not get it because they're not, 20 years old or something? Or are they more worried about getting the internship and they themselves feeling uncomfortable with people, younger than them? So I think internships are a great, great way to get experience. And I think the reality is, if you are, I think you said 37 or so, when you get hired, you'll be working with people younger than you regardless. So it's like that's gonna happen eventually. I even joke with like my business friends, like all these young people, blah blah blah. So you're gonna experience it eventually. And it's more about getting comfortable with that. But I wouldn't not apply to internships because you're worried uh, you may not be considered because of your age.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. Another person here is going back to kind of what we said right at the beginning about jobs outside of tech, and they're just wondering, are there particular types of projects or case studies that would be most impressive to those industries outside tech, or does it matter what the industry is?
I I don't think the industry really matters, to be honest. I think like if you were um looking at a healthcare company or a health insurance company or something like that, and you had previous health or insurance companies and projects that you did, I would definitely highlight those in your cover letter or move them to the beginning of your portfolio or something like that. Um, does that answer the question?
Yeah,
I think
100%.
so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Put your best foot forward. And where possible, if the job you're applying to, if you have experience with that product, that industry, et cetera, like if you're applying to a company that has a SaaS product, then in your cover letter, in initial email exchanges, like highlight the fact that you have experience with SaaS products or business to business, business to consumer, et cetera. So that is an example of how you can be tailoring your materials to the quote user. Because I think a lot of times people hear tailor your resume, tailor your portfolio, et cetera, and they think, oh my gosh, I don't have 4 hours to make a brand new portfolio or resume. What I just described, rearranging projects in your portfolio, that's just like dragging stuff around in Keynote or PowerPoint or whatever you made it in.
Hmm. Okay, great. One question here has caught my eye, which made me laugh, so I'm going to ask it. And it is, Sarah, what is your lighting setup? And I have to say, you do have great lighting.
Well, thank you. And it's so sophisticated, I can't even tell you what the lights are around me. I hired a company, let me Google it to shout them out. Um, it was quite expensive, but they also have potentially self-study courses. It's by Kevin from dreamstudiocourse.com. So check it out. I couldn't even tell you the lights. There is a large light there. There is a spotlight in the corner, and there is a hanging rattan light over there.
Beautiful. It's beautiful lighting. So I hope
Yes,
that's answered
Kevin,
everybody's questions about the lighting.
Kevin helped me drastically. I highly recommend Kevin.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So we have another question here about, how do you go about finding UX opportunities when not every job is advertised? And I guess that kind of is something we haven't touched on too much, is like, where do we find these jobs? Where should we go to look for them?
Yes. So 85% of jobs, according to the US Department of Labor and Statistics, are found and filled through word of mouth and connections. So sure, job boards are obviously useful, but the other really strategic way to find out about jobs is through people. Now, that could mean that you are showing up in online groups and communities, whether it's Slack communities, LinkedIn groups, etc., and you're paying attention to what's going on in there, because oftentimes people, the managers or people on the team, will post in communities they're a part of, because hopefully if I'm a researcher and I'm hiring and I belong to some research communities, guess what? If I post in those research communities, I might get applicants that I'm familiar with, and or I actually know about their experience, which could cut down on the length of time it takes me to find the right candidate, right? You also see this on LinkedIn. People are often posting, hey, my team's hiring, like DM me if you have questions or if you want to send me your resume or something like that. This is why, as I say all the time, it is critical that you don't just focus on platforms in your job search, meaning Indeed, Glassdoor, etc. Don't just focus on platforms, focus on people, meaning LinkedIn groups, etc. And sometimes you might even find out about roles before they hit the job boards, which can give you a great advantage also.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, we have 2 minutes left, so I think that's time for just one last question.
Okay.
And this one is about, internships, and really the reason it caught my eye was just the question at the end. So it begins with, how many internships should I consider before looking for a full-time role? But then they move on to ask, does it look bad on my resume if there are too many short-term employments, so like 3 to 4 months, which I think is a question a lot of people worry about?
Let's answer the second question first. So, no, I don't think it looks bad if you have a bunch of short work engagements, and as long as you can explain why, right? It could look bad if those short engagements were because you got fired 2 months into every single job for the last 3 years. That's not going to look very good, and it's going to be hard to explain your way out of it, especially if it was because of your performance or competency, and not that, it was a reduction in workforce or something like that. So I think this myth that you must stay in a job for 1 year or else it's going to look bad, like, that is advice from like the 1970s or like early 1990s or something. I don't know why we're even still worried about this. But the first question of number of internships, I think it kind of depends, because some internships might be 30 days, some might be 3 months, some might be 6 months. So I think that it kind of depends on that specific situation. And, internships can also happen in the middle of, say, a master's program. So maybe you have an internship after your first year or 6 months or something of your master's, then you get the degree, and then maybe you do another internship after. So I think it's very subjective, but hopefully that gives people confidence around this myth around short job engagements and employment engagements.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And like everything we've discussed this evening, it kind of just ties back into being able to talk about it, being open about it, having a story you can tell.
Yes.
Like you say, rather than just not being able to explain why that might be.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, that brings us right up on time. So Sarah, I just want to thank you so much for answering all of those questions. We threw a lot at you,
Yes.
but I can tell that everybody is really engaged. There's so much chat that's been happening in the chat, and I know that everybody is starting to send messages to thank you so much for your time. Just to let everybody know, what we're going to do after this is we're going to write up a blog article. So I know we mentioned some links we'll share. So we can pull that all together into a nice blog article that we can share, and Sarah will share it with you too, of course. But yeah, just to say thank you so much again. I know everybody got a lot of benefit out of it.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. And everyone can reach out to me, follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Those are the two places I'm most active these days. And maybe you guys didn't know, but I have a podcast that launched in March. It's called the Career Strategy Podcast, where there's a lot of topics that we discussed today also.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
I'm guessing everybody's jumping off now to go and update their LinkedIn.
Hopefully.
But thank you so much. And I'm sure that lots of us will be tuning in to hear more on your podcast. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks. Have a great evening, everyone. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.